I don't know about you guys, but I love having elements be reincorporated in movies. You know, when something that didn't seem relevant suddenly becomes super relevant and just blows everyone's minds. Like, think about Pulp Fiction. I remember watching it for the first time, how ecstatic I was seeing the opening scene become relevant again only in the closing scene. Very often there are elements in movies and television shows that become reincorporated later. But I think it's really awesome when something gets reincorporated or reintroduced correctly. It's kind of like having a twist ending, but it's something that you should have expected to happen. Now, I know this may not exclusively have to do with dialogue or not dialogue, but it's kind of relevant, and it's my video series, so whatever. Now, the problem with reincorporating elements is when you make it too abundantly clear that something is going to matter later. It's almost like spoiling the end of the movie. Now, I know I already talked about Wreck-It Ralph earlier, but this is a good example of what I'm talking about.
If you leave your game, stay safe, stay alert, and whatever you do, don't die. Because if you die outside your own game, you don't regenerate. Ever. Game over.
Now, this scene happens pretty early on in the movie, and at this point, it's completely irrelevant to anything that's happened. Considering that this scene had no relevance at the time, it was pretty obvious that it's going to have relevance later on. And for the record, it does. A lot of the reason why this scene doesn't make a whole lot of sense is the fact that it's just out of nowhere. I'm going to give them a little bit of credit in putting in the form of a PSA, because it does sort of make sense that a PSA would be warning you about something dangerous, like how to get permanently deleted. But I don't think that we in real life see a whole lot of PSAs for things like, remember, if you get shot in the face, you probably will die. It just seems a little ridiculous to me. Point is, this was something that was really obviously going to be reincorporated later. But at the same time, this is a pretty important thing to explain. It's a rule to the universe that has to be understood, and if it wasn't explained, then it would just seem kind of ridiculous when it did actually become relevant. Just imagine somebody outside the game universe and they get permanently deleted, and everybody's like, oh yeah, that's what happens when you die. The audience would just be like, since when was that a thing? I don't know. It just seems really forward, and it's really obvious that it is going to matter again later. So I think that this is an important thing to keep in mind. If you want to reincorporate elements in your movies, it's totally fine. You just have to make sure that it's not super abundantly clear that something's going to be reincorporated. So let's take a look at some films that have done this really well, and have hidden the fact that something is going to matter later while making it very clear that it actually does matter. So first, let's look at The Incredibles again, because it's awesome, and you know, I shouldn't really have to explain why I want to talk about The Incredibles. One of the most famous scenes in The Incredibles is the scene where Edna's saying, "No capes."
Do you remember Thunderhead? Tall, storm powers. Nice man, good with kids.
Listen.
November 15th of 58. All was well, another day saved, when his cape snagged on a missile pin.
Thunderhead was not the brightest bulb.
Stratogale, April 23rd, 57. Cape caught in a jet turbine.
You can't generalize about this.
Meta-Man, express elevator. Diner guy, snag on takeoff. Splashdown, sucked into a vortex. No capes. No, go on. Your new suit will be finished before your next assignment.
Now, if you haven't seen The Incredibles, first, leave. But this scene actually has relevance later when a character is killed because they're wearing a cape.
Oh, no.
But when it appears for the first time, it's hidden in the form of a joke. It seems like this isn't going to have any relevance later, since the relevance now is to bring some laughs out of the audience. Now, to be fair, Syndrome's death would still make sense, but it brings this nice connectivity together. It seems funny rather than morbid, even though it is still really morbid. My point is, the reincorporation is there, but it's not so obvious that it gives away the ending. Just imagine if this scene was done in a non-comedic way. It would be pretty obvious that somebody was going to be killed by a cape. Similarly, there's an event that happens earlier in the film where Mr. Incredible fights the Omnidroid. And this has relevance again near the end of the movie.
Can't stop it. The only thing hard enough to penetrate it is itself.
But the first time it's introduced, we think that it's the only time that he's going to be fighting the Omnidroid, so it's done as part of an action sequence rather than part of an explanation sequence. Because of that, it's really cool to look back at the past part of the movie and be like, oh yeah, that totally makes sense now. Next, let's take a look at Frozen. Now, I don't particularly love Frozen. I think it's alright, but I don't love it. Sorry if you want to flame me now. But I think it's pretty good. The music's alright, there's some pretty funny jokes, but my favorite part about the movie is the twist ending. And for the record, I'm not talking about the fact that Hans is evil. That is obvious from the beginning. But no, I'm talking about what the act of true love is. If you haven't seen Frozen, I really want to know what rock you're living under. But basically in the movie, Anna gets her heart frozen and because of this has to thaw her heart. And they explain that the only way to do this is through an act of true love, which they then imply what the act of true love actually is.
Only an act of true love can thaw a frozen heart.
An act of true love?
A true love's kiss, perhaps?
Anna, we've got to get you back to Hans.
Hans.
Now, throughout the entire movie, they imply that a true love's kiss is what's going to break the spell, which seems to make sense. It's a very Disney-esque ending, and it's pretty obvious that she's going to have to kiss Kristoff in order to break it. But ultimately, in the end, she performs a different act of true love in saving her sister.
Anna? Oh, Elsa. You sacrificed yourself for me? I love you.
An act of true love will thaw a frozen heart.
But that's not what makes it so interesting. I think it's pretty clever how they're constantly reinforcing what the act of true love is going to be, but they twist it on you at the last minute. Disney's messing with us because whatever they claim is going to be the act of true love, we assume is what's going to actually end up being the act of true love. So they constantly tell us something that's not true in order to misdirect us, even though the ultimate ending does make a whole lot of sense. So I think Frozen, while good, isn't spectacular, but man did they nail those twists. And again, how did I know Hans was evil? They just made it seem that way from the beginning. Consider the song Love is an Open Door. Throughout the entire song, Hans doesn't say anything about how much he loves Anna. Instead, he does talk about things like,
I've been searching my whole life to find my own place. And maybe it's the party talking or the chocolate fondue.
But with you,
I found my place.
I see your face.
But that's kind of the joke here. Frozen takes our expectations and sort of twists them and turns them with all of these things that we don't expect to happen in a Disney movie. And so because of that, I have a lot of appreciation for it, even though I don't love it as much as many of my friends and many critics do. I mean, that's pretty much all I have to say. I mean, sorry that I'm focusing mostly on Disney stuff, but they're the ones who are usually the most guilty of it. Maybe I'm just not looking hard enough, but as far as I'm concerned, I just want to keep an eye out for it in the future. And again, I think that filmmakers would definitely err on the side of being too clear than not clear enough. We don't want those ridiculous twist endings that make no sense. That's going to do it for this series. I hope you enjoyed it. I don't know if I'll be posting anytime soon, but we'll figure it out. Let me know what you want to see if you have any ideas. Maybe I'll do a revision of this in the future. I don't really know, but in the meantime, that's all I got. If you haven't seen part 1 and 2, I'll put them up there, I think, something like that. So check those out, and in the meantime, I'll go lie down. See you later.